Welcome to Beverly Unitarian Church. My name is Pat Hoffman. I am a worship associate, and I am so glad to welcome you to worship today. We are a Unitarian Universalist congregation of children, youths, and adults of many races, religions, secular identities, genders, sexual orientations, abilities, educations, life experiences, and traditions. Here we celebrate a diversity of beliefs, striving always to make space for more. All of you is sacred. You are welcome here. Whatever your past or present is like, we invite you to walk into the future with us. Like other Unitarian Universalist congregations, we affirm 7 principles, which are not doctrine or dogma, but rather our shared values and moral guide. To learn more about these principles, please visit the website of our denomination, www.uua.org. Our minister is the Reverend David Schwartz. Today, however, we are fortunate to have as our speaker Shanya Gray. Ms. Gray is an active member of the Southwest Chicago Diversity Collaborative, co-founder of the Moms of Beverly Facebook group, and an assistant professor and counselor at Moraine Valley Community College. She will bring to us a fresh perspective on doing the work needed in our society to bring racial equity and to fight for social justice. I'm happy as well to welcome today our musicians, Renee Wilson and Maria Moser. We especially welcome visitors and hope you'll stay for the virtual coffee hour after the service on Zoom, using the link that will be shared at the end of the service. We look forward to the day when we will be able to meet you in person. Although we are currently distanced physically, we want to stay connected. To get more involved, check out our Facebook page and our website. Contact the office to sign up for our monthly newsletter and weekly Friday email blast, and to be connected to Reverend David for pastoral care. And now, let us join together in spirit and prepare our hearts and minds for worship. Please join me in saying the words for lighting our chalice this morning. We light our chalice, grateful for the love that we experience in this gathered community. May the flame light the way for all who seek such abundance.
Hello, Beverly Unitarian. My name is Shanya Gray, and I will be with you today speaking. We are going to start off with our opening words, which is taken from a book called The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. This reading is entitled, The Need to Look at Oneself. We ought not place too much trust in ourselves, because we are often without grace and understanding. And whatever little glimmer of understanding we do have, we quickly extinguish by our negligence. We are so full of blindness that many times we are unaware of it. For example, we do an evil deed, and to make things worse, we make excuses for ourselves. Or we act through passion and we call it zeal. Likewise, we reproach others for their petty faults, but we glide over our glaring defects. Or we are quick to notice and love to dwell on the affronts we suffer from others, but pay no attention to those we ourselves inflict. If a man justly and properly weighed his own actions, he would never render a harsh judgment against another man. The interior man places his spiritual welfare before everything else, and because he diligently attends to himself, he does not gossip about the actions of others. You will only arrive at a devout inner life by watching over yourself and by being silent with regard to others.
We would be one, as now we join in singing our hymn of love, to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other, to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which binds our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves to greater service, with love and justice strive to make us free.
Hi everyone, it's time for the story for everyone, and I'm going to tell you first about a little Bible story about a man by the name of Job, and we'll talk about what happened to him. So Job was a man in the Bible. If you look up the Bible, you will see his name. He has a whole book to himself, and Job was a very wealthy man. He had lots of stuff. And back in the Bible days, if you were wealthy, it meant you had a lot of animals. So have you heard of camels? Camels are those animals, sometimes you see them in the desert, and they can hold lots of water. The ones with the two humps. Well, Job had 3,000 camels. Can you imagine having 3,000 camels? Job had 3,000 camels. So anyhow, one day, something really bad happened to Job. Job's family all died. His friends got hurt. His animals got destroyed, got stolen. They burnt. Like, Job lost everything. And Job was really sad. And you would be sad too if you lost everything. I know I would be sad. And so Job was really sad. And what ended up happening was 3 of Job's friends came over. They came over to make him feel better, right? You know, sometimes we like when, if we're sad, we have others around us to help us feel better. Well, 3 of Job's friends came over to help him feel better. And Job, he sat with his friends, and they sat with him for a little while. And then after a while, they said to him, Job, what did you do? Did you do something wrong? Why did all this happen to you? What's wrong? What's wrong with you? And Job was like, me? I didn't do anything. You know I'm a good guy. Come on. You know me. You know who I am. And Job was like, I can't believe y'all asking me this. And they're like, yes, you must have done something wrong, Job. Otherwise, this wouldn't happen. And this made Job even more upset and even more sad. And so Job's friends, instead of helping him, they hurt him. Even though they went over to his house to try to help, they left having hurt him. And so kids, friends, let's talk about that today. Sometimes we want to help people, but even though we want to help, sometimes we end up hurting them. So let's think about this. Let's say you're at home and your friend is over and both of you in the backyard playing baseball. And your mom comes and you drop the bat and you run inside. And your friend starts running too, and she trips over your bat. And she gets hurt. She gets a cut on her knee. Now, will you go to your friend and will you be like, well, I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't drop the bat on purpose. I didn't intend for that to happen. Or will you say to your friend, I am so sorry. It was an accident. Are you hurt? Can I get you a Band-Aid? Can I get you a juice box? How can I help you? What is the best response for your friend? Well, as I know you're all saying, is the second response. When we hurt someone, whether or not we mean to, we have to say to that person we're sorry, and we have to try to make it better. Sometimes we do things, and even though we have good intentions, even though we mean to do good, we make mistakes and we hurt others. So kids, that's the lesson for you today. That's the lesson for everyone today, is that sometimes our good intentions can have a harmful impact. And so when what we do causes harm, we have to ensure that we try to make it right and that we say we are sorry. Now, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Don't give mommy and daddy too much trouble, and take care.
This is the time in our service when we share joys and concerns of the past week as we light candles of community, that the living flames may represent the light and life in our hearts that we share with each other. We hope that by sharing with our spiritual family, our joys may be magnified and our burdens lessened. We take comfort that we are united in the vulnerability and community of sharing, and we help to care for our spiritual family by holding their joys and sorrows as well as our own in our hearts and minds. This morning, I light one candle for all of us, and I invite you now to share any joys and concerns in the chat, being mindful that the chat is public. If you wish to share and connect in silence, type I in the chat box, signifying the two fingers that we raise in church.
reading is taken from the Message Bible, and it is found in an introduction to the book of Job, which is the book which my message will be based on today. So let us read. In our compassion, we don't like to see people suffer, and so our instincts are aimed at preventing and alleviating suffering. No doubt, that is a good impulse, but if we really want to reach out to others who are suffering, we should be careful not to be like Job's friends, not to do our helping with the presumption that we can fix things, get rid of them, or make them better. We may look at our suffering friends and imagine how they could have better marriages, better behaved children, better mental and emotional health. But when we rush into fixing suffering, we need to keep in mind several things. First, no matter how insightful we may be, we don't really understand the full nature of our friends' problems. Second, our friends may not want our advice. So, instead of continuing to focus on preventing suffering, which we simply won't be very successful at anyway, perhaps we should begin entering the suffering, participating insofar as we are able, entering the mystery and looking around for God. In other words, we need to quit feeling sorry for people who suffer and instead look up to them, learn from them, and if they will let us, join them in protest and prayer. Pity can be nearsighted and condescending. Shared suffering can be dignifying and life-changing. As we look at Job's suffering and praying and worshiping, we see that he has already blazed the trail of courage and integrity for us to follow.
I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us, so lift me up to the light of change. There is hurting in my family, there is sorrow in my town, there is panic all across the nation, and there is wailing the whole world around. But I am open and I am willing. To be hopeless would be so strange. It dishonors those who come before us, so lift me up to the light of change. May the children see more clearly, may the elders be more wise, may the winds of change caress us, even though they burn our eyes. I am open, I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who come before us, so lift me up to the light of change. Give me a mighty hope to hold my confusion. Give me a desert to hold my fears. Give me a sunset to hold my wonder, and an ocean for my tears. 'Cause I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem seems so strange. It dishonors those who go before us, so lift me up to the light of change.
Good morning, Beverly Unitarian. It is such a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Shanya Gray. I have been at your church many times, and I know many of you who go here. I don't think I've ever been here Sunday morning, and I've been supposed to speak to you for a really long time, so it's wonderful to speak to you today, even though I wish it were in person. I wish I were in front of you, and we could engage in conversation and make eye contact and enjoy each other, but for right now, we aren't able to, and so it is my pleasure to be able to stand before you today to give the message. I want to extend my appreciation and my thanks to David and to Pat and to Maria, all who've extended those invitations to me to be here, and I want to share a little bit just about myself. So my name is Shanya Gray, as I said. I've lived in the Beverly community now for over 10 years. I'm sure a lot of you have heard or know of me. I don't know if I intended to become known in this community, but I do know quite a few people. It reminds me of my small island, Barbados. So I am originally from the island of Barbados in the Caribbean, and it's so funny because every time I go home, I see people I know. We're a small island of 300,000 people, and so I often see people I went to high school with, people I went to church with, family and friends all over as I travel the island, and I feel that way in Beverly now. Beverly now feels like home. It feels like every time I go to the store or I go for a walk, I see people I know, and so it is wonderful to see people in the community. I run Moms of Beverly Facebook group. I'm part of the Southwest Diversity Collaborative. My kids go to school here in the community at Kellogg and at All Day Montessori. And so it really does feel like home, and so it's wonderful to be able to speak with you today. So shall we begin? Today's message, I am going to talk to you a little bit about impact versus intention. And I'm going to bring it to you based on the story of Job. And we're going to talk a little bit about the friends of Job and how we don't want to be like the friends of Job. Now, if you know the Bible at all, you might be familiar with the book of Job. The book of Job is found in the Old Testament, and it really is a lament because Job is a really, really sad story. The book of Job really tells the story of Job, who lived in the land of Uz. And Job was a very wealthy man. The Bible talks about how he had 3,000 camel. He had all of these animals. He was a good man. He was honest. He was good. The Lord had really blessed him. He had 10 kids and their families, and he was really doing well. And as the story goes, one day Satan was talking to God, and God was bragging about Job, and Satan said, well, let me test him if you think Job is such a good man. And so God agreed, and Satan said, okay, let me test Job. And so the story goes, one day, Job gets 4 messages all within one day. You ever had a day like that? Where you're like, Lord, please let this day be over. There's one bad thing after the other. Well, I don't think we've had quite a day like Job ever, but Job had a really doozy of a day. In this day, Job got a message that said to him basically, Job, your animals were just stolen. Job, your family, their house was just set on fire and everybody died. Job, your other family, they were killed. And everything happened within one day. And then guess what? To top it all off, to put the icing on the cake, as we would say, Job ended up getting sores. So not only had he lost everybody in his life, his health ended up being harmed. So Job tore his clothes and he began to lament, as often people in the Bible would do. And 3 of Job's friends came by to visit him. And the story recounts about Job's conversations with his friends. And when we're sad and when we're mourning, we're thankful for friends. And they stayed 7 days to lament and to mourn. And then after the 7th days, the friends, all of our friends, they mean well. And so his friends meant well. And they said, okay, Job, all right, now we've mourned with you. Let us figure out what happened. What really happened? What did you do wrong? Because this just don't happen to people. This just does not happen that you lose everything in one day. This must be punishment from God. What did you do? And Job was like, me? I didn't do anything. I really didn't. You should know me. You were my friends. And they're like, no, Job, you had to do something. Come on. And they got really defensive. And they were like, Job, what's wrong? What did you do? And Job, can you imagine this, right? So Job is mourning. He's lost everybody. And not only is he sad, but now he has to defend his own character against his friends. And this would have to hurt even more, that Job has to defend himself against his friends. And his friends, ultimately, who were good intentioned, they ended up causing more harm to Job. And so today, we're going to take a look at the concept of intention and impact, okay? So oftentimes, we have good intentions in our hearts. We try to do good as people, but sometimes we cause harm. And sometimes what we find is the purest of intentions can have the most egregious of impact. And what do I mean by that? Well, let me take a little bit of time to talk to you about that. Being good intention does not always lead to good results. So let me give you a big example. In our community today, we're fighting for racial equity. One of the big issues is police brutality. I remember going to a meeting here in Beverly a few years ago at St. Barnabas, and it was the first time I actually wrote guest viewpoint for the Beverly Review coming out of this meeting, because I was so upset when I left this meeting. Now, in our neighborhood, we had some young men breaking into garages and so on, and so we had this meeting about it. And our alderman had brought in this private security firm, and this guy who basically gave a description of the perpetrator as a young African-American male. And I remember getting up and saying to him, is that the only description you have? Because if it is, then it is not okay for you to bring that description. Basically, a young African-American male could represent my nephew when he comes to visit me, who was just with me a few weeks ago, or my cousin, my little cousin from Barbados. And they could represent thousands of kids in our neighborhood. And so I said to him, I said, no, that is not good enough. And people said, well, that's why you should know your neighbors, and that's why you should get to know people and so on. But in my mind, I knew what I was saying. And so I went on and I wrote a guest viewpoint about this. And I basically said that it is not about who we know, and it's not about a suspicious person who is an African-American male. It really is about suspicious behavior. And so we could be good intention to get to know our neighbors. We could be good intention to be on the lookout for criminals. But sometimes our good intentions could lead to really bad consequences. And oftentimes I have heard stories over stories in our neighborhood. Our neighborhood is wonderful because our neighbors try to look out for each other. But in trying to look out for each other, sometimes not so good things happen because our biases can get in the way. And so one young lady in my mom's group, she recounts a story of her husband, who is African American, and his friend are sitting out in front of the house in a car talking, and the police showed up. Guess what? The neighbor called the police. The neighbor called the police because they were concerned. They saw these two men sitting out there and thought they were going to cause harm. Now that neighbor, I don't think the neighbor thought, well, I'm going to call the police to cause harm to this family. No. The neighbor, they had good intentions. They were trying to protect their neighborhood. But Thankfully, nothing happened, but this story could have ended a whole lot different. We could be protesting in the streets right now for this story. And so, our good intentions oftentimes can lead to really an egregious impact, really bad consequences. I think of Elijah McClain recently in Colorado. If you ever heard the 911 call, it is the most bizarre 911 call. Elijah McClain was this young African-American male who went to the convenience store for some iced tea. He had on a ski mask because it was cold outside and he was anemic, and often as a mental health professional I could tell that he was mentally ill, and so he was struggling. I want to say he might have been on the autistic spectrum. And you can hear him pleading with his life for these when the police were called. But you hear the 911 call, and it's basically saying, I don't know if he's dangerous. He kind of looks suspicious, but I don't think he's doing anything wrong. And it was this really mixed 911 call. And yes, we look and we blame the police because what happened was not right to Elijah McClain. But let's think about the person who called. Did the person who called really say, I'm going to call so this young man could die today? So this young man could get hurt? Probably not. I think the person who called really had good intentions. They were like, well, I don't know what's going on. He looks kind of suspicious. Let me call. But look what happened. It ended up happening that this young man died because of this phone call. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we really have to think about how our intentions equal or translate to what is the impact that happens. So we can't just think about our intentions. We really have to think about the impact that our intentions cause. And what happens? What happens if we do something that is well intended and it has a negative impact? Well, what we should do is we should apologize. We need to take the time to think about it, to reflect on it, and say we're sorry. One of the most hurtful things is when you say to somebody, you hurt me. That is not helpful. And then the person defends themselves and says, well, I didn't mean to do that, so I wasn't wrong. No, no, no. And I find this happens all too often when it comes to conversations of race and equity. We have put racism as a taboo in our society. And we have set it up as a good versus a bad thing. And we have said, oh, racists are bad people. Well, what really happens is that racism is bad, yes, but there's so many good intentioned people who commit acts of racism and don't even realize. How I explain it is that we are all biased, yes. And we all have that propensity to be biased against others who are different than us. But then what ends up bringing racism to the forefront is racism is that bias and that prejudice coupled with the concept of power, coupled with that idea of power behind it. And so what ends up happening is that so many good intentions turn out to be racist actions, and we have to be mindful of that. We can cause harm. We don't even think about it. Some of the laws that currently are in place in our society, they weren't there because people said, I'm going to put this racist law in place. Yes, there's some, like redlining, that was clearly one. But there are others that aren't necessarily that way. Do you know how traffic laws came about? Traffic laws really came about in 1901 when there were horse-drawn wagons still on the road and cars had just come about, and there were too many collisions between cars and horse-drawn wagons. And so the idea was, let's put this traffic law in place to stop all these accidents from happening. So that was really good intention. Let's have these traffic laws. Who would know today that these traffic laws end up leading to so many deaths? Oftentimes we blame the police for the deaths that occur when police brutality occurs. But do we think beyond that? Do we think about the fact that good intentioned people put those laws in place, which the police have to then enforce, and that leads to all of the violence that ends up happening? Had we not had those laws in place, the police wouldn't stop so many people, and then we wouldn't have as many of these incidents necessarily. So what we have to really do and think about is, how are our good intention actions causing harm? What is the impact they're really having? And beyond thinking about it at an individual level, we really have to start thinking about it at a systemic level. I work at the community college. What does that mean at the community college level? At the community college level, we as educators, I'm a faculty member, right? I'm at Moraine. And I am an assistant professor and I am a counselor there. And yes, I want to put certain policies in place. I want to put certain procedures in place that will help my students, but that will also help me. And so what we find is that when we are in positions of power, we tend to think about ourselves first. And so as teachers, we sometimes put rules in place that benefit us. So one of the examples I like to talk about is a late rule. So as a society, we talk about time a lot, and that's a whole other conversation. So oftentimes we talk about time and not being late and being prompt, and that is a very esteemed value in the American society. And so some instructors I know have these late rules. So if you're late to class, you will get marks deducted, or 2 lates count as an absence. And so this is something that has happened, and oftentimes the instructor has good intentions for implementing it. They're thinking, well, I want to encourage the students to be there on time. I want to have everything in my class. I want to not have any distractions. I want everything to be productive, etc. But what ends up happening is, what is the real impact of such a rule? What is the real impact of such a policy you have? Well, sometimes the impact could be, I have a student who takes the bus. And so they're late because it's beyond their control. And guess what? They end up being late 5 times. And even though they're there, they get 3 absences, and then their grade drops a letter grade. And so that is not a good impact. And so even though we had a good intention policy, we have a negative impact. And so what we have to do is we have to learn to reconcile the two. I think we struggle often with that because in our mind, we are good people, and good people have good intentions. And so if our actions end up producing bad results, we start to think, am I a bad person? Why are my actions producing bad results? But I want to challenge us not to think like that. What we should be thinking about as human beings is, how can I learn from that mistake I made? I think about the concept of growth mindset. My colleague Anna Rogers does a lot of work on that. Maria, she did her doctorate in it. And Carol Dweck talks about this concept of growth mindset. And what growth mindset really says is, as humans, as individuals, we keep learning and growing. And if we keep learning and growing, we will be the better for it. And so when we make mistakes, we embrace our mistakes to move forward in our life. We embrace our mistakes to make ourselves better. And this isn't always the message we've heard, right? So we're coming out of the self-esteem movement of the 80s and 90s, where we felt we wanted to boost the self-esteem of everybody. So our kids constantly heard, and we grew up hearing, good job, good work, nice job, you're so smart. We keep hearing all of these affirmations. And I will tell you that these things aren't necessarily good. These aren't growth mindset affirmations. These are basically zero-sum affirmations. And what these affirmations have done is, a lot of times they've done more harm than good to us. So a lot of times what I've found with my students is, my students don't want to challenge themselves. They don't want to be challenged because they're afraid of looking dumb. So instead of having that mindset of, I will learn and grow and challenge myself to do better, they think, well, I'm afraid to make mistakes and look dumb because then I'm no longer going to get the compliment I'm smart that I need to feel good about myself. I'm no longer going to hear good job, which is what I need to feel better about myself. So what we really need to do is, we really need to retrain ourselves not to think that way, not to think I'm good versus bad, or not to think, oh my gosh, I made a mistake, it's the end of the world, let me defend my mistake because it really reflects badly on who I am. What we should recognize is that it's okay to make mistakes. It doesn't mean we're a bad person overall. Now, if there's a pattern of behavior, then that's a different conversation. But if there isn't a pattern of behavior and we make a mistake, we can grow from it. And so with our kids, what we should be saying to them is, I like how you tackle that challenge. I like how you're working hard on that. Way to go at that challenge. Way to go working hard. We need to really acknowledge the work they're putting into it, as opposed to just saying, oh, good job, good intention. Because then that translates into what we have today, when a lot of times we value the intention and we ignore the impact. So Beverly Unitarian, as I speak to you, and I want to bring my message to a close very shortly, I've thought a lot about this, because in our world today, we want to make an impact. We want to bring change. And so as we strive to do that, as we strive to walk hand in hand, to bring justice, to bring equity, to make the world a better place, we will make mistakes. We won't always get it right. And so as we won't always get it right, let us think about it. Let us take the time to say we're sorry. Let us take the time to really sit with the uncomfortableness of making a mistake. And if we do make that mistake, let us not defend ourselves or defend our intentions, but let us acknowledge the hurt we have caused. Let us make it about the person whom we hurt. Let us make it about the impact, the negative impact it had, and let us try to right the wrong. That is what we must do. So when we look at Job, we learn that we do not want to be Job's friends. Job's friends, they kept pushing him. They kept saying, what did you do wrong? When Job said nothing, they became defensive, and they had a more negative impact on Job. So Job was mourning. Job was already down. He was already in a bad place. So instead of them helping Job, they made things worse for Job. And so as we go about our day or week or month, I want us to really think about how we can recognize the effects of our impact as much of our intentions. I want us to think about, as we think about our actions and what we plan to do, don't just think, oh, this will be a good idea. Think, let me think through this idea and think about the impact it will have. That is how we can make change. Let me think through the impact of this. So let me think through, okay, what could be the worst scenario? If I go and I call the police, what could happen? This is an African American. Should I call my neighbor? Well, can I get my neighbor's number to call to make sure? Should I watch for a little while longer before I jump to conclusions? Maybe I should. Because what happens if I call the police and then something happens? How can I ever live with myself? And so what we need to really think about and what we need to recognize is that it's about the impact and not about the intentions of what we are doing. So I thank you for allowing me to speak with you today. I hope to be able to do it again in the future in person. You know, I don't want to tell you what time it is now. It's really early in the morning. But given that I've had some technical difficulties throughout the day, and I have a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old, and other people in the house, this was the best time to be able to, you know, it's the realities of COVID. This was the best time to be able to bring you this message. But it's been a wonderful time. I pray that you're blessed by my message. And I pray that it really gives you food for thought as you go on throughout your life, throughout your week, throughout your month, throughout your year. So take care, and God bless you.
Keep your heart wide open, though the waves wanna push you around. You've got to keep your heart wide open till your faith brings you back to solid ground. I'm gonna keep, I'm gonna keep, I'm gonna keep. want to push around. Though the waves want to push me around, I'm gonna keep your heart. I'm gonna keep wide open. I'm gonna keep my heart wide open until my faith brings me back to solid ground. Until my faith brings me back to solid ground. I'm gonna keep your heart. I'm gonna keep wide open. I'm gonna keep my heart wide open. Though the waves want to push around, though the waves want to push me around, I'm gonna keep your heart. I'm gonna keep wide open. I'm gonna keep my heart wide open until my faith brings me back to solid ground. Until my faith brings me back to solid ground.
Beverly Unitarian, may you take the time to reflect. May you take the time to look at your actions. May you take the time to recognize your impact. May you walk hand in hand with your neighbors. May you continue to do good in this world. May you bring peace and love and joy. Amen.
We extinguish the chalice here, that it might shine on in our hearts. May it guide our path as we leave this place. May it guide our way until we are together again.